Guys, welcome to the NCS National virtual meeting. The whole purpose of it is to actually just gather guys from around the country. One of the things we saw over the last year was that we had men joining from all over, and men joining from places on a map that are not necessarily
Okay.
near a little
Yeah,
red
they're
dot.
still kind of in intro.
Not near a little red dot where we have a chapter, and we saw an opportunity and felt that God was kind of placing an opportunity for us, for NCS, to just connect guys all over. Summer is a odd time. A lot of chapters kind of take a little hiatus, and so we just wanted to offer this, and the purpose of it is really just like a chapter meeting. So we'll have some Wiley's going to share a little bit with us, and then we're going to just have some time for discussion for all of us here. So yeah, that's kind of the purpose of it, and I appreciate you guys being here, literally from the Northeast, the West Coast, the East Coast, and we've got some Mid-Atlantic and Tennessee. So awesome to have all of you guys with us. So. Let me introduce Wiley to you guys. Wiley is a board member, national board member for NCS. We call Wiley one of the original gangsters because he's been around since the beginning, and he has just always had a very special commitment to NCS. He is a chapter leader for a chapter in Connecticut in Fairfield. And Wiley has a heart, just a tender and sweet heart for men and for addressing the issues that are before us, which right now in July of 2021, we have many. And we're certainly seeing the impact of, kind of phase 2 of COVID and how it's affected men. A lot of personal issues and all those kind of things. So it's awesome to have Wiley with us. Wiley is a business owner and entrepreneur at heart, and he is also just one of my good friends. So with that, I'll welcome Wiley to share tonight a story that he shared with me just, I don't know, over the last month. And I was like, Wiley, this is something we've got to share it. It is very, very piercing. And so with that, I give you Mr. Wiley Mullins, my friend, and a man who has been around NCS for a long time. So Wiley, thanks for joining us, and I'll let you take it away, my friend.
Sure. Thank you, James. First of all, I just want to say welcome. It is good to see everybody. And it's amazing the brevity and the scope of NCS and the reach of NCS. I remember in those early days, it doesn't seem that very long ago, but it's been over 20 years, when there were just 20 or 30 men in the founder's home, and we would meet every Friday morning. And now to see chapters all over the country, and to have a leader like James located out in Colorado, it's amazing. It's such a blessing.
7 people, not James.
Yep, sorry. Who do we have? There we go. Sorry, go ahead, Wiley. We just got a couple more people join us.
Not a problem. But I wanted to share a story with everyone that happened right after college for me. My first job after college was in New Orleans, Louisiana. I grew up in Alabama. And I went to work for, I was a business major, went to work as a sales representative for TJ Lipton Tea Company, and in the New Orleans district. And part of my territory included the city of New Orleans south, all the way down to the coast. And what was so interesting about it was that on the third Monday of every month, I had a client that was located in Slidell, Louisiana, which is quite a distance from New Orleans. So on that Sunday night, I would drive down to Slidell and would be there for an 8 a.m. appointment on those third Mondays. Well, the first time I went to see this client, I had no idea what he was about, other than he had been a long-term customer of Lipton, and his name was Win Ragland. And when I got to his place of business early that Monday morning, I asked for Mr. Ragland, and his assistant went and got him. And what was interesting about Win Ragland was that he was a very tall man. He was 6'3", 6'4". Uh, he wore cowboy boots, uh, faded blue jeans, rolled up sleeves, had a bolo around his neck. And but the most distinguishing factor about Win was that he had a KKK belt buckle uh, on his belt. And it was somewhat startling to me at first, but I never said anything about it. Uh, the first question after I introduced myself to him was, "Who's your father?" And coming from the deep South, like uh, Alabama, where I'm from, I sort of understood that because people would often ask, "Who's your mom? Who's your dad?" to see if they know them, and that would be an assumption that they were good people, you were good people. But of course, me being from Alabama and him being in Louisiana, he didn't know my father. And so we talked and just had a great conversation. And he purchased something from me, which was really, really, you know, great and exciting. I was a new salesman, and I wanted to come back to my boss in New Orleans and tell him that I had I'd been successful. Well, I I got on this routine. It was just something I did every month for 4 or 5 months in a row. I would find myself on the third Monday morning in Slidell meeting with Mr. Ragland, and he always purchased something from me, which was really great. And he was always dressed the same: blue jeans, rolled up shirt, bolo around his neck, and the KKK belt buckle. And again, he never said anything or mentioned anything about it, and I never mentioned anything about it. We just had uh, just a uh, a business relationship, and which was budding into a friendship. Well, long story short, about the seventh month into our business relationship, um, my boss phoned me on that Sunday um, before uh, I was scheduled to be in Slidell on that Monday. And he informed me that um, we would not be meeting at Wynn's office like we had always done, that we would be going to his home. I would be going to his home. And he gave me the address. And this was long before GPS and whatever, but he told me how to get there. And I followed the directions to a T. And yeah, Wynn was ill, but he still wanted to see me. And when I got close to his home, they told me that I would turn down this road and that it would be paved, and a quarter mile down the road, it would turn into a dirt road. But just to keep straight, you would know you were going right if it turned into a dirt road. And that's what I did. And as I approached the dirt road, they said, "You'll see a series of big willow trees." And weeping willow trees are those trees that sort of move back and forth when the wind blows. And it was somewhat, it was just like a scene out of a movie, really. Um, and then I would approach his house, and I saw this big house, this big white house um, to my left, and out front would be a cannon, and on the porch was hanging a Confederate flag. And I just pulled up, got out of my car, and went up to the doorbell. It was the only house on the road, so I knew it was his. And I waited there 3 or 4 minutes, and the maid came to the door. And the maid was a little short black woman, about 4'1" or 4'2", and she looked up at me like, "Who are you?" And she didn't know me. And I told her I was there to see Mr. Ragland, and she closed the door in my face. And a few minutes later, she came back and never said a word to me. After that, she beckoned for me to follow her, and I followed her through the house. And he had a lot of memorabilia, Confederate memorabilia was hanging in the house, and he had things like that. And we went through the house to the sun porch on the back, where he was sitting there waiting for me. And he would still had his jeans on and his house shoes this time, but he still had his KKK belt buckle on his pants. And we talked, and he told the maid to get us a glass of the house wine and a slice of pecan pie. He had lots of pecan trees in the backyard. By the way, the house wine was in that part of the South is referred to as sweet tea. So we would sit out on the porch and have sweet tea and pecan pie. And we talked a little bit about business, but we mostly talked about football. He was a big LSU fan, and of course, I was a big Alabama fan. And we would talk for an hour or so, just about that, and then I would leave. And I did that 3 times. And one day I get this call from Reg, my boss, Reg Baker, and Reg tells me that Win Ragland has passed away, that his funeral is going to be um, in in Slidell, and that Mrs. Ragland had requested that I come um, attend. And I was surprised at that, but I did. I drove back to Slidell for the funeral, and I went to this little church on the outskirts of the city in the rural part of town. The kind of little white frame church buildings with the cemetery right outside of the building where they buried the members who passed away. And this was the first time I'd ever been to a place where all I saw was pickup trucks. And I saw pickup trucks with Confederate flags and all of that. But I walked into the church service and before it started, and I felt like every head in that place turned around and looked at me. And I sat near the rear of the building and stayed there, and um, then left and drove back to New Orleans. It was a few months after that I was going to be leaving my job to go to attend graduate school. And I was in Charlottesville, Virginia, at the University of Virginia. And I went to, I would go on Wednesdays, um, in Wednesday afternoons to the main library. And the reason why I did that is because the newspapers from the South would then be, this is before we had laptops and could pull everything up. Newspapers from the South would arrive at the library, and I always wanted to read about the football scores down in the Southeastern Conference. So I would either read the Commercial Appeal from, I guess that's Memphis, or the Tennessean from Nashville, or the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, or the Birmingham News, or the Times-Picayune from New Orleans, just to find out about the football scores. But this particular day, when I went to the library, I picked up the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and something immediately caught my eye on the front page. There was a reference to Slidell, Louisiana, and there was a reference to Margaret Ragland. And Margaret Ragland was Win Ragland's only daughter. And I had met her a couple of times during the summers when I would go up to the house. And the story was a tragic one. she was in a she was to be a maid of honor of her college roommate's wedding in Atlanta, Georgia, where she attended school. She had graduated and she was the maid of honor. She had gone to Agnes Scott, which is a girls' school in Atlanta. And hours before the wedding, on the wedding day, she was found murdered in her um, hotel room. And it was just, it was startling to read about this and know the people uh, and just wonder what happened. Well, I sort of stayed in, I would go back, for the next week or so every day to that library, hoping to read a follow-up story about Margaret's death, murder. And soon it wasn't in the paper anymore, and so I didn't keep up with it. Well, fast forward a couple of years, I'm now working for Procter and Gamble in Cincinnati as a marketing person, and um, we're doing a big trade show down in New Orleans, and I'm one of the team members that's going to go down 2 or 3 days before the show and set it up, and then stay there and participate in it. And my team and I went down. We got this thing set up in a day and a half, and had a day to kill. So I um, I rented me a car, and I just started because I knew New Orleans. I rented me a car, and I drove around to my old accounts just to look at them, and around the neighborhood where I had lived, and called a buddy that I knew, and he wasn't around. And then for some reason, I got on the interstate and just started driving, and I found myself in Slidell, Louisiana. And I decided to go by Win Ragland's office and just to see his team members because I liked them. They were always nice to me and kind, and I just wanted to stop by and say hello. And Wynn's assistant was there, and she said to me, she says, "I know Mrs. Ragland would really love it if you come to see her. Let me give her a call and see if she's around." And she said, "Please have Wiley come out." And I did. And same routine. I knocked on the door, doorbell, answers the door, closes the door in my face for 4 or 5 minutes, comes back and beckons me to walk through the house to the sun porch. And of course, this time, Mrs. Ragland is sitting where Wynn used to sit, and she and I talked, and we had a glass of the house wine and a piece of pecan pie. And we talked, and I told her about my condolences from Margaret. I'd heard what happened, and we talked a little bit about that. And I was there for about 45 minutes to an hour. Then I told her I needed to get back on the road back to New Orleans. And she said to me, she said, "But I need to tell you something before you leave this place." She said, "Wynn had this business for 42 years, and you're the only person that he ever invited to this house for any reason associated with this business." And then she said to me, she said, "Wynn Ragland loved you." And I sort of looked at her and I thought for a minute, and out of my mouth came these words, "And I loved Wynn Ragland." And I share that story with you guys this evening because, with so much division in our nation right now, in our communities, even in some places, sometimes in some places, in our churches, there's so much division out there. I share this story to say that, you know, we need to find this common ground where we listen to each other and where we're civil to each other. Just those two things. Um, Wynn Ragland probably never had a black man in the house other than the maid or maybe someone doing some work, but certainly not a friend. Um, he wore a KK. I never saw the man alive without his KKK belt buckle on. My black skin is obvious. I mean, there's no mistaking that who I am. I'm a black man. But we neither one of those things, uh, his 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 person or my person, interrupted with anything that he wore or said or anything that I looked like or whatever. It didn't impact the shared experience that we had in becoming friends that cared about each other. I sat at his funeral and I wept because I really enjoyed getting to know him. And I drove back from Slidell to New Orleans that day. I remember it, just thinking to myself, um, what would have happened if on that very first meeting, I would have told my boss, I can't go back to this place for those obvious reasons. But I didn't. And it was one of those lessons that I learned early in life about um, listening to the other side and being civil and respectful. And I think I'll stop here because I'm not a storyteller, but I really wanted to love to hear what some of you guys think about this. If you have any questions.
Yeah, Wiley, I think part of what I loved about that story when you shared it with me was really this is a kind of a lesson or a word to all of us about seeing beyond kind of the external or the initial things that we take in. I mean, um, I I was really struck by this idea that you decided to look past his belt buckle and see a man and look past some of his choices that he never decided he was going to change or never um, said that he regretted. And in fact, most every way he presented himself was in the way of his um, identification with the KKK and Confederate views and being a pro-Confederate man. And um, I was really struck by what his wife said to you about that Wynn loved you, and I'm wondering if um, what do you think brought that level of feeling to him? Like, what about your time, your interactions with him? Do you look back on and say that's
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, I'm sure you were surprised by that, but had to wonder, why did this man love me when he was very clearly identifying all the time that there were people that he didn't care for, particularly people of the black race. And so why do you think that is that he loved you?
Well, one thing, like I said, we really didn't talk a lot about business. We talked about football from the very beginning of our relationship. And I think Wynn found out that he and I were not that different, that we both love football. We both were proud of the Southeastern Conference. He loved, of course, LSU and the Tigers, and I'm a Crimson Tide person. And but we had a lot of fun with that. We um, we met in a place where we could build a relationship from. We built our relationship from football, from talking about football. It turned out to be much bigger and far broader than football. It turned out to be about building a relationship that was full of care and love and interest. And it was great. it was one of those great aha moments in my lifetime.
I mean, I think what I love about this story is that it's a great example of kind of the NCS experience where we're about guys sharing their stories and about
Mhm.
sharing their lives. I think for most any person I know, when they share their story, there's also parts that they regret or parts they would like to change. And um, I know for me personally, like I have some actions that I took in my life that I have deep regret over and a lot of guilt and um, just things that I see in my life that I'm just like, wow, that is just something I wish I could take back. And I think part of NCS is being able to tell these stories, be honest with them, and own them, and not let that define us. And one of the things I love in my job is just getting to hear a lot of men's stories. And I love being able to tell them honestly, I'm so thankful you shared that with me. There's a lot of that that plays into my own story in life. But I want you to know that this is never what I will think about when I think about you.
Mhm.
And it's just, the idea, Wiley, that when you think of Win Raglan, you think about a lot more than the belt buckle he wanted to make sure everybody saw and the flags that he flew and um, some of his very overt identifiers, and saw him as a human man. And I think when we sort of lean into that, I think essentially that's what Jesus does for each of us, right? Like Jesus knows our story. He knows all the things even beyond what we share and the parts of us that are dark and think things and want things and pursue things and our ego and our lust and our thoughts and all those things. And I find a great deal of comfort in thinking about the fact that and believing that Jesus says, yeah, James, I know all those things. It's just not what I think about when I think about you. And I think that's really kind of an essential part of NCS is that we share our stories and then we hold them together and are able to say, yeah, like, appreciate you sharing it. And I want you to know it's not what I think about when I think about you. I can know your story, love you, and also just want to be a part of your life and a part of your story. Um, so I think there's just a lot about that really resonates with me as a commonality that I don't have that experience like Wiley did with Win Raglan, but I have a lot of my own experiences and I've been a part of a lot of different men's experiences. So um, I think going beyond sort of the racial overtones of the story, I just love the idea that you saw him in his humanity and chose to go back and see the man, not the belt buckle or the flag. And it obviously paid off in really unique ways, and obviously was very meaningful in your life. And I love the early question: Who is your father? If that doesn't resonate within NCS stories, like nothing will. It plays a huge part in who we are as men and what drives us, shapes us, uh, colors our view of God, the whole thing. So it's just there's just such an incredible metaphor for us in NCS from this.
Mhm.
Um, so, guys, this is again a point of engagement, discussion, processing. So, feel free to take yourself off mute if you got a question for Wiley, or maybe a comment, or maybe even some sort of personal reflection that's like, this part of this is hard for me, or I wouldn't have done it, or I couldn't have taken that high road. Anyway, everything's welcome here, and we're open to any interaction that you had in this. And so I just would like time for anyone that wants to share or ask a question. This is open floor, so feel free to take yourself off mute and do that.
Hey guys, my name is Nagesh. I was really hoping someone else would speak, and I waited for it. I heard the story, and thank you for sharing the story, Wiley. I really appreciate it. The thing, one of my mentors, at some point said that, among the men, we can be bonded together if we share these stories. We can be vulnerable with each other, and these stories are the ones which knit us together. And I'm really glad, amidst all the differences that you had projected, you guys talked about the common things that was there as such. And the fact that I love the most about this, about when, is that he made it intentional, so that he knows about you. And the only way somebody can make it intentional is like, by sharing about himself, what he loves, and finding about what you love. And on top of that, he made it even more personally intentional to find out, to be not for um, social norms, but to be very curious about who your father is. That's a very important question, to know you and know everything else that comes along with that question as such. So the desire, the intent to know another brother, another man, basically. So that shows that someone cares. I mean, like, that is my interpretation of it. And the other person is going to know about me in person as much as I let them know. So if we are in Christ, like when we meet brothers and we call and use the word brothers, and we hardly know them, because we need to be able to share these things so that they can know. It has to be the intentional part which grabbed my attention as such. So I appreciate from that perspective. Having said that, I had a question. What made him invite you to his home? Because I'm assuming you did not talk about football before then.
Yeah, we used to we would talk about we would talk about football, and we talk about other things. I remember he asked me a few times about my experiences in college, and what I wanted to do, and was I going to buy a house in Louisiana. And he wanted me to, and he said, well, you really don't have to live in New Orleans. You could live other places. And I had no intentions of staying in Louisiana. I just went down there to get some experience and get into graduate school. But I didn't tell him that. But we talked about other things, and he was real big on family. He told me that I should, you know, think about starting a family down there, raising a family, and a good place to do it. We were just friends. We just had a lot in common. And the more we talked, the more we found out how much we had in common and how we weren't that dissimilar. I didn't even think about, after the first time there with the flag and the and belt buckle and the cannon out in the front yard. I didn't even think about that stuff. I was going to see my friend, and I was delighted to do it. And what was interesting about it? He was the only customer that I had in Slidell, and he could have called me on the phone and could have given me the order in 5 minutes of what he was going to buy from me. But from the very beginning of our relationship, uh, I think he took an interest in me, and I consequently took an interest in him. And so uh, I would have probably screamed and yelled, "Why am I having to go and stay in a motel?" I used to stay in this motel called the Horseshoe Bend, and the Horseshoe Bend had an 8-foot door on the front and an 8-foot door in the back of the room. And I asked the guy at the motel one night. I said, "Why are there? Tell me this. Why are there two doors in this motel room?" He says, "Well, just in case somebody comes in one, you can go out the other." That's not a very comforting thing when you're down in Louisiana, in that part of Louisiana. But I found myself really looking forward. It was probably um, the most. It was the farthest away in my territory, but it was the one I look forward to every month going to see him. Uh, in spite of the fact that he had that belt buckle and those other things, I really look forward to going to see him. It was like going to see an old friend after the initial one or two visits. We just really had a bond with him.
I
Thank
think
you.
about intentional choices, right? Like Wynn probably made a very intentional choice to go make sure he bought a cannon and that he had, a good Confederate flag that looked good, and he certainly was very intentional about how he got dressed every day and what held his pants up with a belt buckle. And he was also very intentional about his relationship with you and the conversations you had. And it's interesting that you can make very intentional choices that are can be very off-putting and also very inviting. And I just think that's so interesting. Wiley, I assume that in a situation like that, there were not a lot of white men who asked, "Who is your father?" because they wouldn't have known
He's
him.
the only person that's ever asked me that in my career. Of course, when I was a boy and was cutting grass for people in town or raking leaves, we didn't have leaf blowers back then. They weren't invented. We um, we would have to rake, and you'd go to somebody's house and you'd ask them if they need their grass cut or their leaves raked, and they would ask things like, "Who's your father?" So that was a Southern thing. Uh, People in the town where I grew up would do that to, if, like I said, if they knew your dad was an honorable person, then they assumed you were the same.
Well, um, guys, who else has kind of maybe a question for Wiley or a personal interaction or a reaction to this? Like we've got about another 10 minutes, and I just want anyone that's got something that struck them personally about this to have a chance to do so. So we've got about 10 minutes, and like anyone to share and everyone to share that would like to. So feel free to unmute yourself. And
This is Michael. Hi, Wiley. Yeah.
Hey, Michael.
Hi, James.
hi, bud.
Good to see you. I have one question. In dealing with issues like this, where it's just complicated, I guess is one word for it. Has your faith ever played a part in how you reacted to this sort of thing? Because I find it when I'm in similar circumstances to dealing with complicated things, I'm easily triggered. I start sweating. I think of ways to diffuse it. I'm a peacemaker by birth order and just by nature, and I've helped mediate things in life and what have you. But like, how do you like if you do involve your faith in it, how do you remember to do it when I guess for you it was natural, right? Because you were immediately disarmed and disarming. Just curious about that.
Well, it's interesting you asked that question, Michael. Um, I live in Connecticut, and I have lived here for a couple of decades now, in a fairly affluent part of Connecticut. And people ask questions that you can interpret differently. They ask questions sometimes when you're different that they wouldn't ask of other people. Like, for instance, I get questions like, "Where do you live?" And it's like that has nothing to do with anything, but it's sort of like people are trying to figure out, Are you successful? Or, I got asked, I was at an event the other day and somebody says, where did you go to school? And I just decided to answer this way. I said, I've been out of college so long ago, I can't even remember, you know, and, you have to, you know, people have beliefs about people who are different than they are in so many different ways. And that is one thing that I think that I have really tried to work on, and that is not to uh, not to think a certain way about anybody, not have preconceived ideas about who you are and your background and all this stuff. A buddy of mine uh, was getting married, and another buddy. It was three of us that were really close, and he was 53, uh, getting married for the first time. And so another buddy of mine and I said, well, let's host something out at the Inn at Longshore, which is in Westport, Connecticut, on the water, golf course, all of that. And so we told him we were going to host a party for him. And I said, my friend said, well, invite 20 guys. And Wiley and I split it. He'll pay for 10 and I'll pay for 10. So invite 20 guys. And so that's what we did. And one of the visitors, man that I did not know, came in, and during the cocktail hour, he came up to me and he said, where's the restroom? And I showed him the restroom. And then after he got back from the restroom, he said, well, I bet a bouncer in a high class joint like this get paid a lot. And this guy didn't even realize I'm paying for his meal. And you cannot you cannot control how other people think and their ideas about a situation. You can only control your own. And I just politely told him, I said, I wouldn't know that. I'm one of the hosts. Harold is a friend of mine, and I'm so glad you can make it. And that's all. That's all I said to him. And it's nice to have you here. And he looked so uncomfortable. But regardless of what people do or what they do, you still have to do the right thing. And I have a sign up in my office that's you guys know the phrase. It's a popular TV commercial, just like a good neighbor. But that reminds me that I have to be a neighbor because I'm a child of God, and a neighbor is something that is right up there with loving your neighbor and caring for your neighbor, which is anybody and everybody. Is right up there with loving God. And that's what we have to do. That's a great question, Michael. I hope I answered it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys, we got about 5 more minutes. Anybody else?
Yes, can I say something, Bob Larrick?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I find you very likable, all very likable also. But what made you overcome I would assume you'd be a little nervous. What made you overcome that? And I think you bring up the issue of the need to see each other with greater humanity. Oh, bringing out the best in our humanity. And maybe he loved you because you helped him bring out the best in him. And isn't that a good example of, I believe, talking about our national politics, which I work on all the time, and the need to understand our original foundation from the Declaration of Independence of all God's children and human rights, Father, where we really came from, is really not the issue of separation of church and state as much as it was that separation to as a challenge and freedom of consciousness to bring out our better natures. And God is challenging us all for freedom and opportunity to bring out our best. And thank you for being an example of that Christ-like and God-like loving. And isn't the Abrahamic brotherhood, I had sisterhood too, initiative, not just as a financial, not just as a transaction, an opportunity to build upon that spirit rather than the secular and racial and ethnic divides all over the world, which is something, by the way, someone I knew from the UN, Francis Deng, wrote a book, Clash of Visions, Identities in Conflict. He was writing about Sudan, but doesn't it apply to every place? And don't we need different types of supremacy of our humanity and our better natures, which you and the group bring out, I believe, as Christ's true spirit, rather than bashing each other as enemies.
What made you overcome that? Like, I think Robert asked a great question. Like, what made you overcome that, Wiley?
Well, I grew up in the South. It was, I guess it was a civil rights era. I was a kid. And I remember my father was a funeral director and had a funeral home. And I remember being one of the only Black-owned businesses in town. You were sort of put in a position of leadership. It was the pastors and ministers and a few other business people that were the leaders and the caretakers, shepherds, if you will, of that community. And I remember when Martin Luther King Jr. Died. I was in the lower grades in 1968. I was in the lower grades, and I had 3 older siblings, and I didn't know him, but I still recall those conversations of what was said and how it was said, and people talked about, caring for each other and loving each other. And I remember a Jewish gentleman came to the door, and my brothers, who were older, came back in the house and told my mother a guy was at the door with a bowl. They called it a bowl. It was a yarmulke, I guess, on his head. And he came, and she got Daddy, and he and Daddy sat and talked. And I remember Daddy saying that his name was Mr. Weinbaum, and he said, Mr. Weinbaum is our friend, is our neighbor, and he came to see what he could do to help. And I will never forget that day that Papa said that. And then I remember in 1994, when my father passed away, Mr. Weinbaum was one of the first people at our house. And I heard him tell my mother, I came to help. What can I do? And I guess that's it. It's really being the help, being there to help for any and everybody. And I never forgot that.
Wow, that's great stuff, Wiley. Well, it's probably not hard for you guys to see why Wiley is one of my favorite people. And I say of Wiley that I'm a better person for every time I get to be with him. And I think Wiley is a man of vast experiences, and those experiences have challenged him in his life. And I feel like when he shares those things with me, it challenges me in my life. So I'm super thankful, Wiley, one, that this happened to you, and two, that share it. Because, obviously right now we're in a place in American life where we need to see more of people beyond their belt buckle, beyond their skin color, beyond the intentional choices they've made in what they wear or what they have around their offices or homes. And I do just love that story. I will say quick, guys, that I came across a really interesting documentary called Accidental Courtesy. And it's literally about a Black man who just befriended a very open, costume wearing member of the KKK. And it reminded me so much of Wiley's story. And I thought it was so good. So if you're looking for something that kind of continues this journey, I have to highly recommend it. But anyway, guys, thank you for being here, for spending an hour with us. Wiley, thanks for sharing your story and just your own personal decisions with us in the face of hard things. And I'll say that again, just that I think NCS is about sharing our stories and our experiences, and even the opinions that we hold and where those come from. And I think a lot of those, we can trace back to that story. Who was your father? And Wiley, your father chose to raise you a certain way, and he modeled a lot of seeing humanity in people. And I think that's such a marvelous example. So I will close us, rather in a word of prayer. I'm going to close us with one of my favorite elements from the Bible, out of Isaiah. And we're in a time where there are a lot of rough places in America, rough places in life, and a lot of, I think, questions just about what do I do now? Personally, with work, with family, how do I respond to much of the political and racial divides and very inflamed issues in our country? I love this verse, a couple verses out of Isaiah 42, and they have been buoys in my life at moments where I feel like I was drowning in a lot of things. So I'll close this just by sharing this. So in Isaiah 42:16, he says, I will lead the blind by ways they do not know. Along unfamiliar paths, I will guide them. I will make the dark places light. I will make the rough places smooth, and I will lead them with my right hand, and I'll do that because I am their God. So may that be a word that we take with us, and that we can hopefully take God at his word as he makes dark places light, leads us in new ways and unfamiliar paths, and he makes rough places smooth. And I don't know any of us that probably don't need that. So with that, guys, I thank you again for being a part of this. We do this every month, and it's always a little different, and I always love the interactions. The people who share and the people who interact, it's life-giving to me. So I appreciate your time and your investment in our conversation tonight. So with that, blessings on all of you. Make the rough places smooth and the dark places light, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Very likable.
That's the